beginning a research project can actually be quite daunting. Part of this, especially for a novice writer, is that it's very difficult to determine how you get from a topic that you want to write about to something narrow enough that you can actually do research on it. Now, at first, this may seem fairly simple, right? You just think of a topic and you start doing research on that topic. The problem is that topics can be extremely large. Let's say I wanted to research on Christmas, right? What am I going to research about Christmas? There are all kinds of directions that I can go in researching the topic of Christmas. What does the word Christmas mean? Why is Christmas important? Why isn't Christmas important? Why are people happy during Christmas time? Why are some people sad during Christmas time? Why do some people hate the fact that we start playing Christmas music so close to Thanksgiving now, sometimes even before Thanksgiving? Like, why does that irritate some people so much? Why does it irritate people that some people say happy holidays rather than Merry Christmas? Why do we decorate trees? Why do we drink eggnog? And you get the picture here, right? Once you choose a topic, there are so many different directions you can go in terms of researching that topic. Even once you get your idea narrowed down enough to research it, how do you know whether or not your topic is worthy of an academic or scholarly essay? In the university, most essays that you write are going to be scholarly in nature. That's one of the things the university is trying to help you learn how to do, is how to see the world in a scholarly way. This leads to a problem that I've seen a lot with novice research writers. Often, novice research writers, novice scholars are tempted to start with an opinion that they already hold and then just go and do some research and find some information or some facts and some quotes to back up their beliefs. Now, I'm not saying scholars never do this, and I'm not saying there aren't scholarly articles out there, even big popular ones or majorly influential ones, that haven't done this, that haven't started with an opinion and just cherry-picked information to substantiate their opinion or to defend their opinion. I'm not saying this doesn't happen, but at its best, that's not what scholarly research is about. That's not what scholarly argument is about. At its best, a scholarly argument is not just a well-researched opinion article, but neither is it just a collection of facts. It's not there merely to give the reader information on some topic. That's what encyclopedia articles do. If a scholarly essay isn't merely an opinion piece, and if a scholarly essay isn't merely like an encyclopedia article, what is it? In order to understand scholarly writing, you have to first understand the role of the scholarly reader. Understanding the role of the scholarly reader, understanding why it is that a reader comes to a scholarly article and what it is the reader is trying to get out of the scholarly article, can help you as a writer understand your role as a scholarly writer. What is it you're supposed to be doing? In an opinion editorial, whether you agree with the opinion editorial or disagree with the opinion editorial, a person comes to an opinion editorial for the conflict. That's the purpose. You're either coming to an opinion editorial in some online magazine like the New York Times or the National Review or whatever it is. You go to an opinion article in order to either say, yes, I agree with this, or no, I don't agree with this. And thus the purpose of the opinion editorial is to rile you up, to motivate you to action. On the other hand, an encyclopedia article is just there to give you information. There's no real persuasion that should be happening in an encyclopedia article. An encyclopedia article just presents largely inarguable facts. Now, I know that I'm oversimplifying things here. Facts can be argued about, but by and large, an encyclopedia article is designed just to communicate facts. That's not the purpose of a scholarly article, but neither is the purpose of a scholarly article merely to share an opinion, although expert opinions are absolutely part and parcel of a scholarly article. The purpose of a scholarly article, the reason people come to read scholarly articles, is to understand something better. And understanding doesn't come merely through the presentation of facts or merely through the presentation of opinions, particularly opinions that are in some way grounded in shared values or opinions that are in some way grounded in prejudices. Understanding comes through analysis, through interpretation, by placing facts and opinions within a larger context of knowledge, within a larger context of understandings. It's not merely about facts, not just to know the facts of an issue. And it's not merely to get an expert's opinion. They want to understand some issue within their profession, or they want to understand some working of the universe, or they want to understand in some way a society or a civilization or their place in the universe. The role of the scholarly writer then is to present understanding. And the scholar, through a process of researching some problem or some issue and asking questions about that problem or issue, many questions about that problem or issue, by reading what others have said about the problem, other answers that have been provided to questions or other solutions that have been provided to a problem, the scholarly writer comes to understand this particular problem in a unique way. And then they want to share this new understanding of the problem that they have. But the purpose of sharing their perspective is to help the reader understand the problem in the same way that they do. And so the scholarly writer uses facts, uses quotes, uses other people's ideas to help the scholarly reader see the problem from their perspective and understand the problem in the same way that they do. So there is an element of persuasion going on here. But the scholarly writer is not attempting to persuade in the same way that an opinion writer does. What the scholarly writer is trying to do is say, hey, I've done a lot of thinking about this issue. Here are some of the thinking that I've done. I've done a lot of reading about this issue. Here's some of the reading that I've done. Here's some of the people I agree with and some of the people I disagree with. And in doing all of this reading and all of this thinking, I've come to understand this problem in this way. And by presenting all of these facts and all of this research, what you're essentially saying to your reader is, my understanding is valid. Now that's the role of the scholarly writer. And that's the way that the role of the scholarly writer and the scholarly reader work together to determine how the scholarly text is developed and why the scholarly text is developed in the way that it is. So, with this understanding in place, how do you narrow down your topic? How does understanding what your role is help lead you to a narrowed topic that is sufficiently narrowed that it will enable you to write a quasi-scholarly article, particularly if you're a novice, if you've never done this before? All right, so the scholarly writer does employ facts and figures and quotes in defense of their opinions, and they do argue to persuade. But their goal is to persuade the reader that they've discovered some new understanding about a problem, something of value, whether that's social value, economic value, cultural value, artistic value. And because their role is to provide understanding, to increase our collective knowledge, as it were, the scholarly writer has to ensure that the topic they're writing about is sufficiently narrow enough that it can be written about from a position of expertise. Because expertise, by definition, is narrow. If you're an engineer, You're not going to be an expert in engineering. You might be an expert in engineering houses or engineering airplanes or engineering office buildings or engineering waterworks or engineering roads or engineering computers. Engineering is too broad. You become an expert in some more narrow area. And then within that area, there are even more narrow experts. So expertise is by definition narrow. Let's go back to my example. If I want to write about Christmas, there's a lot I can write about in terms of Christmas. Maybe I want to become an expert in Christmas music. Maybe I want to become an expert in the history of, I don't know, decorating Christmas trees. Maybe I want to become an expert in the history of the conflict between Jesus and Santa Claus in Christmas. Now, this is kind of silly. I'm using something relatively silly, but it's more significant than you would think, because in the same way that somebody thinks about something like Christmas is going to be the way that a scholar thinks about something like abortion or race relations or international relations or economic theory or linguistic theory. A scholar isn't going to approach these things like an opinion editorialist would in the New York Times or in the Washington Post or the National Review or whatever. A scholar, let me rephrase that. A scholar shouldn't approach these things the way an opinion editorialist would, nor should a scholar approach these things the way that an encyclopedist would, just going out and gathering as much information as possible and saying, here, there's all the information that I have on abortion, right? Or the various sides of abortion. Remember the role of the scholar. The role of the scholar is to seek understanding and to provide understanding. And so a scholar wouldn't merely want you to agree or disagree with their position on something, but they would want you to understand the positions themselves a little bit better, understand a given position a little bit better. That's the goal of the scholar. What universities are asking of students, when they ask a student to write a scholarly research essay, like in your freshman year, you're going to be asked to do this. What they're doing is saying, we want you to start thinking like a scholar. And part of that for you, when writing a scholarly research essay in your undergraduate courses, is going to be finding a topic and narrowing it. So how do you do this? How do you narrow down your topic? Well, interestingly, style can help you answer this question. The words that you choose, how you construct your questions, how you construct your research topics, the words you use to construct your sentences can actually help you narrow your topic and focus what you're talking about. Let's take Christmas again. As I said earlier, if I say I want to research Christmas or I want to understand Christmas, this topic is very broad. It's way too vague. You can't really find anything to say about that. Just because it's too big. There's too much there. Why do I want to understand Christmas? What do I want to understand about Christmas? Do I want to understand what the word Christmas means or why it's important? Do I want to understand why we have one story about a baby in a manger and another story about a right jolly old elf who delivers presents? Do I want to understand why we give fruitcake, the worst of all the cakes, during what's supposed to be the happiest season of the year? Do I want to understand when and why we started playing Christmas music at Thanksgiving and why this irritates some people so much? Okay, so there's two things that I want you to notice here about the questions that I was asking. First is that I could go on asking these questions almost ad infinitum. That's how broad the topic of Christmas is, right? But by asking these questions, I'm beginning to narrow my topic. So one way that scholars begin narrowing down their topic is simply by asking questions. Questions that get them closer and closer to a narrow, researchable topic. But the second thing I want you to notice about these questions that I'm asking is that they're not just any old questions. I'm asking whys and hows and whats and whens. In other words, the questions that I'm asking are probing questions. And this is one of the keys to narrowing your topic sufficiently that you can write a scholarly article about it. I want to talk about the two basic kinds of questions that you can ask as you begin doing your research. The first question, the first kind of question, is what might be called binary questions. These are questions that lead to either or, yes and no answers. Think about questions like, should you play holiday music before Thanksgiving? Do people who say happy holidays hate Jesus? Is Christmas music a form of hate speech? Now, these questions they're silly, but I'm asking silly questions to prove a point. Notice the way that each of these questions start. Should, do, is. These kinds of words all have something similar about them. Not only do most people already have an answer to these kinds of questions before the question is even asked, but these questions inspire answers that are either or, yes or no, knee-jerk responses that are based in values that you already hold. If I were to ask you, should you play holiday music before Thanksgiving? You already know the answer to that question. And what I mean by that is that there's not necessarily one right answer to that question, but you already have an answer to the question before it's asked. Your answer to the question is grounded in your value system, a value system you come to the question with. And because you're only given an either or answer, or you're given a question that demands an either or answer, you're just going to fall back on your value system. These kinds of questions do not lead to a more profound understanding of your topic. Instead, they cause you to put up your defenses. They cause you to take a stand and immediately begin arguing for that stance. But let's take a step back. Let's reframe those questions so that they're not either or questions. In other words, let's ask probing questions. Probing questions not only don't inspire an either or answer, probing questions actively inhibit either or responses. Rather than asking something like, should you play holiday music before Thanksgiving? That's a simple binary question. It's seeking an either or answer. A scholar might ask something like this: why do some people get upset about playing holiday music before Thanksgiving? What can their emotional reaction to playing holiday music before Thanksgiving tell us about holiday music? What are some reasons they might give for feeling the way they do about playing holiday music before Thanksgiving? What might this emotional reaction tell us about holiday music's role in the way people feel about the holiday season? Notice that none of these questions can be answered with a simple either or response. But also notice that you can't just fall back on your values here. You can't just fall back on preconceptions, take a stand, and then defend that stance. These questions, the way that they're asked, actually inhibit that kind of reaction to the question. They force you to go and ask more questions. They force you to go and do some research, maybe talk to some people, using words like why and how and when and what actually encourage research. And it's not just research to defend your position, it's research that's designed to get you to understand something better. So one of the ways to narrow your topic has to do with the questions that you ask, the kinds of questions that you ask. Are you asking binary questions, or are you asking probing questions? Are you asking questions that have an easy either or response, or are you asking questions that force you to probe the issue more deeply? I'm not saying either or questions or binary questions are something you should absolutely avoid, but be aware of what these either or questions do. And when you ask an either or question, it should be followed up by probing questions that force you to look into the issue more deeply. So far, I've done this only with frivolous questions. You know, the whole topic of Christmas is kind of frivolous. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but this approach to question asking is important to understand. This differentiating between binary and probing questions is important to understand because it applies to all kinds of questions that you might ask in the public sphere. A lot of the questions that we ask in the public sphere, like a lot of the questions that drive our politics, many of these questions you will find are actually binary questions. And as I said, these binary questions have a tendency to encourage us to fall back on our prejudices, fall back on our preconceptions, rather than actually explore an issue. So for example, you may be asked questions like, is abortion murder? Should abortion be an absolute right? Do unborn babies have a right to life? Are white people somehow especially privileged? Are people of color uniquely oppressed in the Western world? Are women uniquely oppressed in the Western world? Or is socialism good? Is capitalism good? Or is capitalism bad? Does Europe owe reparations for its period of imperial history? Does the United States owe reparations to the descendants of African slaves? Is it right that some people have more money than other people? Should healthcare be free at the point of delivery? Should rich people pay more taxes than they already do? Should we build more nuclear reactors so we can move away from fossil fuels? Notice that all of these questions start with one of those words that leads to a binary either-or answer. Should, is, does, are. And the problem, again, with these kinds of questions on these kinds of topics is that they do not lead to probing answers. They don't even inspire you to probe at all. They inspire you to fall back on values and suppositions and prejudices and preconceptions that you already hold. Take a stand based on those preconceptions and then defend that stance. These are not questions that lead to thought. They're questions that lead to conflict. But if we were to take a step back and reframe these questions, rather than asking, for example, is abortion murder? You might ask, what are some similarities between murder and abortion? What are some differences between murder and abortion? Why should those similarities and differences inform lawmakers? How should those similarities and differences inform lawmakers? How might understanding these similarities and differences help us craft laws that protect both the life of the unborn and the right of a woman to bodily autonomy? Now, these are some really complex issues. And these questions don't allow you to merely fall back on your prejudices about the topic. They force you to probe. They force you to do some research. They force you to do some deep thinking. So think about what I said earlier. Style can actually help you figure out a way to narrow the topic. If you're focusing on what words you're using in order to ask your questions, the words you choose will direct how you approach the problem, whether you approach it in a simplistic way or a probing way, a complicated way. So binary questions are, is, does, should. These words encourage us to think in binary ways and to fall back on preconceptions. Probing questions, questions that start with words like why and how and what. These kinds of questions demand that we probe the issue and actually impede us from falling back on our preconceptions. But it's not just the words at the beginning of your questions that matter. There are other words that can help you focus a research project. For example, let's say I wanted to frame something in this way. Perhaps I say something like, I want to investigate the conflict over when is too early to start playing holiday music. Specifically, I want to figure out why holiday music is played earlier and earlier every year and why some people get so irritated when holiday music starts being played before or around Thanksgiving. Now notice that I'm not asking a question here, but the words that I'm using are still helping me to narrow the project down, narrow my topic down. The words that I'm using are suggesting a specific problem that I can approach and that I could do some research on. Notice that I'm using words like conflict, why, specifically. The word conflict encourages me to locate an arguable problem. The word conflict actually suggests that there's more than one way to think about this problem and that these problems come into conflict with each other, that there are different sides of this issue. The word why pushes me to consider various reasons for the different positions that are held on this particular topic. And then there's the word specifically. The word specifically pushes me to move from what might be a broader position on the topic or a broader problem to a narrow, more specific problem within that broader topic. So you can actually take this framework, take out the specifics that I've put in there, and just look at it as a framework to push you, to help you formulate a topic to talk about. I want to investigate the conflict over blah, blah, blah. I want to investigate the conflict over X problem. I want to understand why A and why B. That's the basic formula there. So if you take that formula and put in your own specifics, suddenly the framework, the style of your sentence helps you to narrow the topic. So stylistics is actually a big part of narrowing your topic. The words that you choose and how you frame your sentences, how you construct your sentences, is going to help you narrow your topic. Now, there is the threat of narrowing a topic too much. It's not much of a threat. However, you do want to make sure that your topic, what you're arguing, is actually arguable. You wouldn't say something like, I want to know whether or not Christmas actually exists. That's not arguable. Christmas is a thing, right? Or I want to know whether or not people are actually playing Christmas music before Thanksgiving or close to Thanksgiving. That's not really going to be arguable. Not only is once you start researching this, you're going to find that yes, this happens. But once you discover it, you're kind of screwed. You can't go any further. So what happens if you narrow your topic too much? Let's say I'm looking at whether or not people actually start playing holiday music at Thanksgiving or before Thanksgiving. Once I find that, I can begin interpreting that. Why do people play holiday music before Thanksgiving? What does it mean that they're playing holiday music before Thanksgiving? How does the fact that they play holiday music before Thanksgiving help me interpret how meaningful Christmas is to them or the holiday season is to them? Notice some of the words that I'm using. Why, how, interpret, meaningful. All of these words take what appears to be an extremely narrow and unarguable topic into the realm of arguability. To sum up, the great secret to writing in general is understanding your role in any given rhetorical situation. You have to understand that your role as a writer is largely determined by the role of the reader. What do readers come to this sort of a rhetorical situation looking for? Your job as a writer, your role as a writer, is to meet those expectations. Now, that doesn't mean that you must slavishly give the reader whatever they want. Your job may partially be to challenge the reader's expectations, to challenge the reader's preconceptions, because sometimes readers come to an essay expecting that. The role of the scholarly writer is to help the reader understand something. And this means that they're looking at various perspectives on the issue. They are interpreting and analyzing. They will be summarizing. They'll be challenging, explaining. There's all kinds of things that a scholarly writer has to do. But first and foremost, their role is to help the reader understand something. Your job or role as a scholarly writer then is to let your reader know that there is some problem and that you have discovered some solution to that problem, some deeper understanding that helps them solve the problem. Whether their interest is professional, personal, political, philosophical, theological, material, economic, ideological, whatever their interest in the problem is. Readers of academic and scholarly articles are seeking solution to important problems, meaningful solutions to important problems, meaningful answers to important questions. They're seeking understanding. To provide understanding requires a scholarly writer to become an expert in a very narrow area of knowledge so that they can defend their arguments from a position of expertise. You have to be able to first show that you understand the problem and that what you're offering is a new understanding or a deeper understanding of this issue than they've had previously. Now, that's a lot to ask of freshman writers. I mean, the reality is that you probably don't know these things well enough yourself to be able to argue from a position of expertise. You have to keep in mind that what's going on here in a freshman writing course is practice. What your teacher should be looking for isn't that you're an expert in some topic, but that you're practicing the moves of scholarly writing. It takes years to become an expert. Now, there's another video that I've done on perfection versus perfectionism. I encourage you to watch that so that you can understand what I'm talking about here, but don't let yourself be a perfectionist. You're practicing, you're learning, you're a student. But there's a difference between a lazy student who just doesn't want to do the work and so puts in the bare minimum, and a student who is actively trying to perform the role of a scholarly writer, even if they're doing it at a novice level. Don't let your writing appear lazy. Don't communicate to your teacher that you don't care. That's a surefire way to get a bad grade. Your job as a student is to learn. Your average teacher, even your typically below average teacher, is going to try their darndest to give you the tools necessary to understand your role and perform it. Your job is to do the best you can to perform your role. And if you're not doing broad research, if you're not trying to narrow your topic, if you're not trying to perform the role to the best of your ability, you don't deserve a good grade. But if you are, don't let the perfectionist side of yourself keep you from turning something in. Get it in. Get feedback on it. Do the best you can. Of course, there's a message in here for teachers as well. And that's that we university teachers should not be expecting graduate level work out of you or professional level work. We have to be able to read your essays as student essays. And as a teacher, that's what I try to do. I try to read these as works in progress, as students in progress. You are a person in progress. You're a student. You're learning. So don't overthink this, but don't be lazy either. And don't kid yourself and tell yourself you're putting in your best work when you're not. This stuff is something that all of you can learn. It's just a matter of practice. And you have to be willing to put in the practice. You have to be willing to fail. And I'm not talking get an F. I'm talking fail in the short term so that you can succeed in the long term. We learn by doing things the wrong way and then figuring out what we did wrong. But if you're unwilling to do it the wrong way, you're never going to be able to do it the right way. Focus on narrowing down your topic. It's a very simple system. You find a topic, you start asking questions. How you frame those questions, the words you use to ask those questions matter. And once you've narrowed your topic down sufficiently to find an interesting problem, you start researching the problem so that you can understand the problem, understand what other people have said about the problem, and develop a unique perspective on the problem or a unique solution to the problem. While facts and opinions in and of themselves may be interesting, they do not often lead to deeper understandings about an issue. And therefore, they're not the primary focus of a scholarly argument. Rather, in a scholarly argument, facts and opinions and figures, they have to have a purpose. They have to be rallied in defense of some larger assertion, some argument that you're making. They're there to help persuade your reader that you not only know what you're talking about, but that you've come to some deeper understanding about this topic. That's the value of the scholarly essay to the scholarly reader. In other words, readers come to scholarly essays to engage in what could best be described as an ongoing conversation about the meaning of a particular profession, about the meaning of life, about what it is to be human in the world. That's the big thing. You want to focus on something narrow, like Christmas music, and why the heck we start listening to it around Thanksgiving. All right, that's it for me for now. I'll talk to you again soon.